A 7-year-old boy who had never spoken a single word in his entire life suddenly shouted 2 words that made a billionaire father drop to his knees and cry. And the person who made it happen? A garbage man named Joe Mack who everyone else ignored. You're probably thinking this is some feel-good movie plot, but this actually happened. And when you hear what Joe did, you'll realize why most people completely miss what truly matters in life. George Whitmore had everything money could buy: private jets, a mansion with 14 bedrooms. Cars are worth more than most people's houses, but his son, little Ethan, hadn't said a single word since the day he was born. 7 years, complete silence. Doctors couldn't explain it, speech therapists couldn't fix it. George spent over $2 million flying specialists from around the world. Nothing worked. The boy just stared at people with these big, sad eyes and never made a sound. But here's what's crazy. George was so busy making more millions that he barely spent 20 minutes a day with his own son. He'd throw money at the problem and disappear into business meetings. The nannies practically raised Ethan. Now, every Tuesday and Friday morning, Joe Mack would pull up to the Whitmore mansion at exactly 6:47 a.m. to collect the trash. Joe was a single dad himself, working double shifts to support his daughter after his wife left them 3 years earlier. And here's where it gets interesting. Joe noticed something nobody else did. Every garbage day, little Ethan would be sitting by the window, just watching Joe work with this intense focus that seemed weird for a kid. Most people would have ignored it, but Joe, he did something different. He waved every single time. Wait until you hear what happened next. After 2 weeks of waving, Joe started making funny faces at the window, crossing his eyes, sticking out his tongue, pretending to juggle trash bags, and for the first time in Ethan's life, according to the nannies, the kid smiled. Actually smiled. Joe didn't know Ethan couldn't speak. He just thought he was a shy rich kid who needed a friend. So Joe kept it up. Week after week, rain or shine, he'd perform his little garbage collection comedy show for an audience of one silent boy. 3 months in, Joe did something that would change everything. He brought his daughter Emma to work one Tuesday. She was 8 years old, just a year older than Ethan. And when Emma saw Ethan watching from the window, she didn't wave. She grabbed a piece of chalk from Joe's truck and drew a giant smiley face on the driveway. Ethan's eyes went wide. The next garbage day, there was a drawing waiting for them. Ethan had convinced a nanny to help him draw a smiley face back. But here's the part that'll blow your mind. Joe started leaving little toys by the gate. A small rubber ball, a toy truck, nothing expensive, just things Emma had outgrown, and every time Ethan would be at the window watching Joe place them there like they were made of gold. George noticed the toys and told the staff to throw them away. "My son doesn't play with garbage," he said, but Ethan hid them under his bed. Those cheap dollar store toys became his most prized possessions. 6 months into this routine, something happened that nobody saw coming. It was pouring rain one Friday morning, absolutely dumping. Joe was running late because his truck had broken down and he was collecting trash on foot, soaked to the bone. Emma was sick, so she wasn't with him. Ethan was at the window and he saw Joe slip and fall hard on the wet driveway. The garbage bags went everywhere. Joe tried to get up, but you could see he'd hurt his ankle badly. And this is where everything changed. The nanny who was supposed to be watching Ethan said she heard the front door slam. She ran to check and saw Ethan sprinting across the driveway in his pajamas, rain soaking him instantly. The 7-year-old boy who'd never spoken ran straight to Joe. Joe looked up, confused, in pain, and then Ethan did something impossible. He grabbed Joe's hand with both of his tiny hands, looked him dead in the eyes, and screamed 2 words at the top of his lungs. "Get up." The nanny literally fainted. Joe sat there in the rain, completely frozen, because even he knew something miraculous had just happened. But wait, it gets even crazier. Ethan didn't stop there. He kept yelling, get up," over and over. Tears streamed down his face, pulling on Joe's arm with everything he had. George heard the screaming from inside. He ran out and saw his silent son shouting words, actual words, to a garbage man he'd barely noticed existed. George dropped to his knees right there in the rain and sobbed. not the quiet, dignified cry of a billionaire. The ugly, chest-heaving sob of a father who just gotten his son back. The doctors George called in later said the same thing they'd been saying for years. No medical explanation. Selective mutism doesn't just break like that, but here's what one therapist told George that made him realize the truth. Your son didn't lack the ability to speak, he lacked a reason to. Let that sink in for a second. Ethan had been surrounded by people paid to care about him, nannies who worked shifts, therapists who watched the clock, a father who was physically there but emotionally gone. Nobody in his world needed him, nobody depended on him for anything. But Joe needed help, real help, and for the first time Ethan had something important to say to someone who actually mattered to him. Now here's the unbelievable part. George didn't just thank Joe and send him away. He sat down with this garbage man and asked him something billionaires rarely ask anyone: what am I doing wrong? Joe told him straight, your kid doesn't need more toys or bigger rooms, he needs you to show up, actually show up, like how I show up every Tuesday and Friday. That hit George harder than any business loss ever had. George offered Joe a job, chief of staff, 6 figures. Joe turned it down flat. I've got a route to finish and a daughter who needs her dad home for dinner, he said, but he made George a deal. Every Tuesday and Friday, George had to be outside with Ethan when Joe came by. No phone, no assistant, just a father and son saying hi to their friend the garbage man. And you know what happened? Within 3 months, Ethan was speaking full sentences. Within 6 months, he was talking nonstop, making up for 7 years of silence. The specialists called it impossible, George called it a miracle. But Joe called it something else. The kid just needed to matter to somebody. 5 years later, Ethan is 12 now and won't shut up, according to George, who says it with the biggest smile you've ever seen. Joe still works his route, still waves at the window, still makes funny faces. Except now George and Ethan are out there every Tuesday and Friday without fail. Sometimes they help Joe with the bags, a billionaire and his son taking out trash with their best friend. George says those 20 minutes twice a week taught him more about being a father than $2 million in therapy ever did. And here's the question you need to ask yourself. How many Joe Macks are you walking past every single day? How many people are you ignoring because they don't fit into your picture of who matters? That garbage man saw a kid who needed a friend and showed up, consistently, without expecting anything back, and he literally gave a child his voice. Think about the last time you showed up for someone like that, really showed up, not because you had to, not because you'd get something out of it, but because you saw someone who needed to matter to somebody. Drop a comment right now and tell me about a time someone showed up for you when they didn't have to. Or tell me about someone you're going to start showing up for differently after hearing this. And if this story hits you the way it hit me, smash that like button and subscribe, because next week I'm bringing you another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things that'll completely change how you see the world. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it.